When I was a kid and I needed to show the number 3, I used these 3 fingers. But as I've gotten older, I've lost finger flexibility, I guess. So now I use these 3 fingers. This is 3 Minutes to Better Tattooing. Welcome to the Fireside. My name is Jake. I'm so happy to have you here with me today. This is a really interesting 3 Minutes to Better Tattooing, I think. And it's not one that I really planned for in advance. It kind of fell in my lap. It revealed itself to me throughout the process of tattooing. If you've been following some of our recent episodes, particularly our machine review and technical kind of gear related episodes, you've heard us talk about the difference in amperage and voltage and what they mean to tattooers when it comes to choosing power supplies, battery packs, tattoo machines, all those types of things. So just in case you haven't been paying attention to those episodes or don't know what I'm talking about with amperage and voltage or why it matters in tattooing, why it should matter to you, let me just quickly run through what volts and amps are. So voltage measures the force or potential of electricity that can be delivered through a power source. So if that's an outlet in your house, that has 120 volts sitting at that outlet that you're able to access by plugging a device into that outlet. Amps, on the other hand, are determined by the device that you are trying to power. So, for example, if I'm trying to charge this cell phone, it may only need 10,000 milliamps to actually charge this phone. Even though that outlet is 120 volts and can probably put out 20 or 30 amps, this may only use a few milliamps to charge. Now, on the other hand, a big air compressor may pull 10 or 15 amps, or maybe too many amps for that outlet. That outlet may only be able to provide 20 amps and this thing requires 25 amps, and that's when you'll have things like your breakers in your house tripping or fuses blowing and things like that. So voltage measures the potential or the force, and amperage measures the actual flow of electricity, and it's determined by the device. Let's move that over into tattoo terms. In tattooing, in order to power our machines, we use things like power supplies or batteries. Now, we don't need 120 volts coming out of a wall to power a tattoo machine. So these power supplies are designed so that we can dial back and deliver just the amount of voltage that we need for that machine. The issue is, as we drop the volts, the available amperage also drops. So some power supplies may only deliver 1 continuous amp or 3 continuous amps. Normally that's not a big deal because a tattoo machine probably doesn't ever draw even a single amp, especially when it's not under any sort of load. If you're just running a tattoo machine, say a pin style rotary machine like this, it's probably drawing just a fraction of an amp just to spin that little rotary motor. It's not under any real strain. It doesn't take a lot of amperage to turn it. Now, when that starts to change is when we put force against that motor. So in tattooing, force against that motor might be skin, or it might be these super thick, creamy inks that we're using these days that tend to dry up a little bit in the tube or in the cartridge. So just as a quick example, if I were to turn this power supply up and I'm delivering, 3.5 volts, and I run this machine, the machine's not struggling at all to run at 3.5 volts. If, on the other hand, I put backwards force against that machine, it takes more amps. It's going to try to draw more amps to continue to turn that motor at the same speed. So this force, like I said, would be the force of the needles hitting the skin, the drag of the ointments or the inks or anything else that might get in the tube and slow or create resistance against the tattoo machine. So this machine might go from drawing a fraction of 1 amp to drawing 2 or more amps whenever there's this backwards kind of force pressed against it. We've all heard people say things like, well, it doesn't matter what power supply. I order the $25 Amazon power supply and it works just as well as the Critical or the Icon or the Muso Toku. And my point here is just to say that that is not necessarily true. Now, that was kind of a long intro and backstory just to get to the point of the episode, but I wanted you to understand what the differences are between amperage and voltage and why they matter. We have been discussing this kind of stuff on Fireside for the last year or so, on and off, and it's all kind of been in theory. I've never been able to give an actual real life example, a real life tattoo example of what happens or the results of a machine that is not getting the amperage that it needs to push needles into skin, as opposed to a machine that is getting that amperage until now. So most of the time these days, I am just using this Numa tattoo machine and this little critical battery pack, and this is what I'm doing most of my lines, shading, coloring, and all this stuff with, and it tends to work fine. I do on occasion do these kind of whipped, stippled types of tattooing where it looks like individual dot work, but it is actually done with this Dan Cuban Sidewinder running extremely slow, between 2.5 and 3 volts, with a small needle configuration like a 3 or 5 liner. So I was recently starting one of these whipped stippled types of tattoos, and my power supply was not readily available. I have a friend, my old buddy, former podcast host, David Evans, is tattooing here with me for the last several months, and his power supply was set up and mine was not. So rather than getting all of my stuff out, I just decided to hook up to his power supply, his clip cord, and start my tattoo. Well, I noticed as I started tattooing that I wasn't getting the whipped, kind of clean, peppered dot look that I've come to expect out of using this machine at 2.7 volts with my power supply. In fact, the dots looked inconsistent in density. They weren't perfectly round. They were oblong in shape, and they looked almost like it was scratching the surface of the skin and getting more kind of irritation than I'm used to. What I'm used to with my power supply is getting a pretty clean dot in and out of the skin, very, very little irritation, almost no redness, no bleeding, and I was getting redness and a little bleeding using David's power supply at 2.6, 2.7 volts. I quickly switched over, got my own power supply out, switched over, and finished the tattoo with my power supply. Well, I happened to run across this client just a couple of weeks ago when the tattoo was about 1 month healed, and this is an in-progress piece, so I was able to grab some footage of it healed and settled in. Let's take a look at it right now and see if you can tell where I used which power supply. All right, so just for context, here is a fresh image of the first pass of the tattoo that I noticed this issue with. So you can see it's a very kind of balanced, positive, negative, stylized, full chest piece that's going to have that kind of peppered shading all the way through it. And we'll do it over a couple of passes so that it's more rendered, but it's still meant to have that kind of graphic, stylized look. And here is the healed footage of the same tattoo, about a month settled in. Like I said, this is just the first pass, and it will be rendered further, but just take a look at the quality of the dots, of the marks, and pay attention to where you can see individual textures and dot work and where you can't, and that'll tell you where I was using which power supply. So the areas with the clearer marks are the ones where I was using the power supply that had about 5 continuous amps available. And the areas where the marks look a little more muddled and not quite as clean and clear is where I was using a power supply that had 2 available continuous amps. And here's a still shot where I've highlighted areas where I think that the difference is most obvious between the 2 power supplies. And like I mentioned before, the only change that I made was in the power supply. I used the same machine, both power supplies running at the same voltage, same needle configuration, same ink. It's just the difference in the available continuous amps. And I'm kind of interested in experimenting with these variables a little bit further. So here's a piece that I worked on just the other day, and this is on an inner bicep, really, really high up kind of by the armpit. So an area that's very easily agitated and irritated. And you can see that I used the lower amperage power supply that only has 2 continuous amps in the background where it's incredibly red, and then I use the 5 continuous amps power supply on the feathers in the foreground where you can see the individual dot work a little more clearly. So this is enough evidence for me to say with some confidence that not all power supplies are created equally, and you definitely should pay attention to not only the starting amps for a power supply, but the continuous amps that it's able to provide so that your machine can draw all of the amperage that it needs to get needles in and out of the skin as efficiently as possible. Thanks so much for watching this way more than 3 minutes to better tattooing. I hope you got something out of it. If you do appreciate what we do here at Fireside, support us by supporting our sponsors. Buy the stuff that you're already buying. You can get 10% off of the awesome Numa 4 tattoo machine, 10% off of the Reinventing the Tattoo membership, annual membership with Guy Aitchison, and tons of tattoo education content on there. 10% off your stencil paper and tattooing supplies at S8 Tattoo. The great thing about using our affiliate links, which are in the video description below, is that you get a discount on the products that you're already buying or should be buying, and we get a little bit of a kickback, which allows us to continue making these videos. Thank you guys so much for supporting the Fireside Tattoo Network. We will see you in the next episode.